I'm Darren Morton.
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift,
The Lifestyle Medicine podcast where we dive into the science of health and wellbeing. Well, it is good to see you again, Brother Simon. How is sunny Spain?
Sunny Spain is very sunny just at the moment.
Nice.
Enjoying a few days in a row. We had a bit of stormy weather in the last month or so, but in fact through the whole of southwest Europe, there's been some storms, maybe even some minor flooding. But today, sunny Spain is sunny.
Sunny
And
Spain. Well,
the rain in Spain is not falling mainly on the plain.
oh, that's good to hear. I'm in the thriving metropolis of Currumbong, where I live. It is actually raining today, which I'm lamenting the loss of summer. But I have a question for you, and here's my question: do you have any favourite movies that you watch almost like on an annual basis, like you've seen many times before?
Oh, absolutely, of course.
Which
You want me
is,
to tell you what it is?
yeah,
Every Christmas, I watch the best Christmas movie ever made,
The Grinch.
Die Hard with Bruce Willis.
Is that a Christmas movie? Wow.
Well, it took place across Christmas. Yeah. So it's a Christmas movie.
No, it sounds like a great way to celebrate Christmas. You know, even the name is just conjures warmth and fuzzy feelings, doesn't it? So, yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Well, that said, I do actually we have a couple of Christmas ones that we watch, my wife and I. But the one that I want to mention to you is a movie that I think is one of the most genial movie that's ever been made. And I'm going to have masses of people who disagree with me on this, but it is The Castle. Have you ever watched The Castle?
Oh, yeah.
The Castle. Okay,
Yeah,
so
the
this one here,
the Australian film, The Castle. Yeah,
the Australian film. So if you're listening from outside of Australia, I don't even know if you'll be able to get your hands on this, but we went to watch The Castle as a joke because we thought this just looks like, quintessential Aussie ochre humour, and that's exactly what it is. But it is an incredibly heartwarming story, and I love there's a whole lot of one-liners that have come out of this, like tell him he's dreaming and some of these other statements that we Aussies use all the time. So every Australian Day, I now watch The Castle, and I try and encourage my family to join me. Don't always have a lot of success with it, but nonetheless, it is a great movie. But what I love, there's one particular scene in the movie where, for those who don't know the story, it's about this, just sort of standard Australian family, just that represent all that's good about, Australian families. And one of the young fellows, one of the sons, is constantly going through the trading post, which is like Craigslist in the United States, just buying stuff. And anyway, but whilst he's not doing that, he's coming up with these ideas. And so he invents these ideas, and the father just keeps saying, yeah, he's an ideas man. He's an ideas man. Not a lot of these ideas go very far, but nonetheless, they're ideas. And you know what? I love ideas. In fact, I would say, my wife has said to me on a couple of occasions, she goes, you're an ideas man, aren't you? And it's the tone with which she says it sort of communicates that that's not a great idea. But nonetheless, you're an ideas man. You roll with your idea and see what happens. And I have seen what happens with my ideas. Most of them flop miserably and don't go very far. But some ideas do go really, really well. And in fact, ideas can change the world, as we know. And I'm fascinated by this because we actually see, historical examples of these great ideas that caught on, although they often take a long time to catch on. And then there's modern examples of this. And in fact, it was Everett Rogers back in the 1960s who observed this idea of what he referred to as the diffusion of ideas. And sometimes it's now referred to as the diffusion of innovation.
Diffusion of innovations, yeah.
And I love it. It's this nice little curve. And it sort of says that, when a new idea comes along, there are a few people that get on it, and they're the innovators, and they get excited about these new ideas. And then you have some that start to follow, and they're the early adopters. And then you get in the middle, you sort of get the early majority of, if the idea is a good one, really catches on, and then the late majority. And then I actually really enjoy his curve, because at the end of it, there are the laggards. So I don't know, are you ever a laggard, Simon?
I tend, yeah, that's an interesting question. To some extent, to a small extent, it depends on what the idea is, but maybe only to a small extent. I tend to pretty enthusiastically embrace new ideas myself, and yeah, I'm probably, sitting generally somewhere around the early adopters, I think, with a lot of things. Yeah.
Do you know what? Confession time. I actually think I am a laggard in some areas, at least. I'm definitely an ideas person. Like I love the idea of creating, new ideas, and I think they're great ideas. And obviously, because they're my ideas, they are great ideas to me, not everyone else. But I look at, even last night we went shopping with my wife, and we wanted to buy some new clothes. And I said, I really like that, and I really like that. And she's like, yeah, that would have been great about 6 years ago. Because it takes a while. It does. I see stuff, and I think it takes a while for me to see and go, oh, yeah, that looks good on that person. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, okay, let's get that now. And they're not in the shops anymore because the new stuff's come in. So maybe I am a bit of a lag in that regard. But what I love about this whole of ideas is, and it's so intriguing to watch the diffusion of new ideas, is that there seems to be these 3 steps that they go through. And originally, new ideas are often ridiculed, right? So there's actually quite strong antagonism towards a new idea. So it's ridiculed, almost dismissed as, what kind of a crazy would think that? Then the next stage goes into sort of more of a violent, structured opposition to it. So it's quite, we need to beat this thing down. And then the last stage is this acceptance, almost as self-evident. And we actually see evidence of this going through a whole range of different ideas. And I'm just throwing some historical examples. But, perhaps one of the classic is
there's a really obvious historical example. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, the Copernican revolution. So, this is when Copernicus does his maths, and Galileo is, I think, in the mix there too. And they're going, wait a second, we don't think the Earth is actually the center of the universe. Right? Because it was funny, if you look at the way they had to account for, because they could watch the movement of stars across the sky, and you could actually watch it go across, and then it was like it would do this little loop thing there and then keep going, because I forget the name, the heliocentric loops or something or other, because it just didn't make sense the way they'd configured the worldview of the way the planets and solar system worked. But what was interesting, when he came up with this idea, and that, hey, maybe it all works a lot better, and the maths makes a whole lot more sense if the Earth isn't the center, but the sun is the center. The next thing that followed is obviously this violent opposition, to the point of, you recant those statements or we kill you kind of thing. And then about 100 years later, and it's interesting, going back in those days, it would often take sort of 90 to 100 years before this sort of idea would diffuse through to mainstream acceptance, and people would acknowledge it. And then today, there's not too many of us on the planet that sort of go against this idea.
An important part of that, of course, is the context that those new ideas are being introduced into. So the ideas of heliocentricity really. So this was the 1600s, 400 years ago, that they were being introduced into a context in which the church was prevailing at the time, the Catholic Church, and there was a view that God had created this order in this very, very specific way. And so essentially what Galileo was saying was considered vehemently heretical.
That's correct.
And that, of course, led to, he had to recant. He was placed under house arrest for the rest of his life. Yeah, yeah.
And actually, I didn't follow up on his whole story. So I don't know if you know the details. Was it the rest of his life that he actually spent under those sorts of circumstances?
Actually, that's a good question, and I can't say that I'm certain
Mm.
whether he was. In fact, I do know that subsequently the church apologised and
Wow.
recognised that it had erred in taking that action against him.
Mm. And
But yeah.
obviously that example was rocking the very foundation of the
Exactly.
worldview of people, and it was actually integral to their faith context. And as we know, religion inspires the best and worst in people for their best and the worst.
Yeah.
But it's not even big ideas like that actually rock people's worldview. It was even things like I'm thinking of Ignaz Semmelweis, the Vienna physician in charge of the hospital there. He was, the whole hand washing thing. He was the one that observed, that, hey, maybe there's these things that we can't see that are in the bodily fluids of people that are sick and dying that you can be transferred to someone else. And anyway, he was the one that came up with the idea of let's wash our hands, and ridiculed in the first instance. Like he was taken through the ringer. Like he was just absolutely ostracized for his views, and it became and once again you're thinking, who's trying to protect something here? Like it's not like in the case of like the Copernicus and Galileo that they're challenging a dogma or a worldview. This is just like, what, just wash your hand, people. Life will go on as normal. Well, it actually will get a whole lot better than normal. And yet he still had that violent opposition to the point where he was so emotionally distressed from that he was admitted into a psychiatric hospital. And to my understanding, is that he did actually die, not knowing that his ideas would gain acceptance and then be spread. And you think to yourself, wow, isn't this interesting how we humans, we have these innovators and yes, these early adopters, but then we have the process of moving and diffusing that through to become mainstream can often be really, really long. It can be a long journey and a rough road for those that are the thought leaders driving it all.
And sometimes the other dimension to that, Darren, is that the ideas don't even need to be vehemently opposed. So we've used a couple of examples, where someone came up with an idea and there was a strong pushback. But if you look, for example, at the end of the 19th century, so the 1890s, the American Psychological Association was founded. William James, a psychologist, was its first president, and during one of his presidential speeches, I think, he made reference to the idea that he and I'm paraphrasing here, but he hoped that psychology would be able to investigate, examine, and be able to explain how humans can kind of maximally use their abilities. Now, we know the direction that psychology, professionally took largely after that. But what does that sound like? A desire for that psychology might explain how people can use their abilities to the fullest. Well, I mean, it sounds in many ways similar to what we now call as the field, or what we now refer to as the field of positive psychology. And it was pretty much another. I mean, interestingly and ironically, it was another 100 years until Martin Seligman became president of the APA in the late 1990s. Before those ideas really started to gain traction. But here's the other fascinating thing too. William James wasn't even the first person to say this. So if we can go back a couple thousand years or a few thousand years to some of the ancient Greek philosophers who themselves were articulating these sorts of ideas and ideals about human performance, human behaviour, everything that humans could be. So even if there's no intense opposition, sometimes ideas just take a long time, I think, to kind of permeate the fabric of the world. Because even if there's no opposition, to some extent, you are kind of turning around prevailing thinking.
Yes.
You are challenging prevailing thinking and trying to find a way to have new ideas find their place in the world.
Yeah, I find actually that your reference to William James, I find that fascinating, and I actually first learnt that from reading an article that you've written, believe it or not. So I do read your work, brother. And I think in that same article you'd mentioned that Maslow, like in the 1950s or so, he'd actually used phrases like positive, psychological approaches. So yeah, and so then you think to yourself, wow, if Galileo, if Copernicus took a century essentially for their ideas to permeate, and then we see the same things in psychology, in the 20th century. Do you think that because I've got another really good example of this, but lifestyle medicine, is a new idea. Well, it's an old idea that's been innovated. Innovated into the current healthcare system, and what's its journey going to be? Is it going to be 100 years? I mean, the ACLM, the American College, has just turned 20. Are we going to have to wait that much longer before, or with the way that the world is, we're more connected, we communicate better, will the innovation and the diffusion of ideas be accelerated? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a fascinating question, and if we take a sort of global perspective here, and think about I'm going to call it the modern origins of lifestyle medicine, because we know that the principles of lifestyle medicine are literally thousands of years old, but the modern origins of lifestyle medicine, are somewhere between maybe 25 and 30 years old. I think you've done this. You've searched the phrase lifestyle medicine on Google Ngram at some stage. I know we've had this conversation. And the first references to lifestyle medicine, I think, appear in perhaps the 1990s, perhaps a little bit before, but they track very flat for a long period of time. Before starting to increase sharply in the late 1990s. So think about the length of time that you and I have both been involved in lifestyle medicine, and think about the changes and the growth and the development that we've already seen in that time. I mean, how many nations around the world now have a lifestyle medicine society or college or organisation? We're seeing lifestyle medicine kind of move back down the chain into universities as well, including Avondale University, where you and I both teach on a lifestyle medicine postgraduate degree. We're seeing an integration of lifestyle medicine into longevity medicine, which I think is another fascinating area and development. So even in our lifetimes, and even in the last few years, we've seen huge advances, and at the same time, I'm quite comfortable with the idea that simply because of our age, you and I are not ever going to see, the full expression of lifestyle medicine in healthcare systems, and the way that lifestyle medicine, I think, will ultimately become integrated into healthcare. I think that's many decades away. But here's the interesting reflection that I have. We often use the phrase modern medicine to describe the what sometimes gets called the sick care system that we all live with. But it really, historically, that didn't take that many years to develop in this way. I mean, it's largely a post-industrial revolution system, prior to that, we had, physicians and apothecaries, and we had, we had understandings like humours being the reason for ill health. Once we got to what you might call the modern era, and once we got to the point of some really good research and developments like microscopes and so on, that enabled us to see and understand things in a way that we hadn't before. The development of the current system that we have, in universal terms, didn't take that long. So that gives me hope and confidence that the development of lifestyle medicine, perhaps will similarly not be, thousands of years. It'll be a matter of decades. You and I aren't going to see the end of it, but I will be happy knowing that I've contributed something at this stage that's going to make a difference to something at the other end.
Well, this is where I'm encouraged, is that even if it does take 100 years for this idea to come through, there is, and this is a story of, one of the pillars, obviously, and a cornerstone pillar of lifestyle medicine is nutrition, and an emphasis on sort of whole plant-based eating. And if you look at the story of that's really been, it was Mervyn Harding, who was the PhD candidate, who did one of the very first studies, and this was about 1950, looking at the adequacy of a vegetarian diet. So that was actually the topic for his PhD program, and he had to do a defence in front of a panel before he commenced his studies. And anyway, it was interesting. He got ridiculed. So that in the first, that whole ridicule, then opposition, and then acceptance as self-evident, those three stages, he saw all of that. And he actually reports, I actually know his son, believe it or not, but he reports that when he did his PhD proposal, that I'd like to research the adequacy of the vegetarian diet. And the panel went, well, that's a ridiculous topic. And he went, really, why is that? And they said, of course it's inadequate. And he said, well, I'm a vegetarian and I seem to be doing okay. And they said, case in point, then you shouldn't be studying it because you're biased. If you're a vegetarian, you should not be studying whether the vegetarian diet's adequate. And his response, he was obviously quite a witty man. His response was, there's sort of only two types of people in the world. There's vegetarians and non-vegetarians. Would a non-vegetarian be any less biased? So anyway, sort of they conceded on that one. But anyway, one of the people on the panel for his PhD said they'd done the search, and they said, hey, look at this. We have come across a paper which actually is titled Anemia Detected Amongst a Vegetarian Male, and it was published in a medical journal. And they said, so there you go. The evidence is already in this. And Mervyn Harding's response to that, he said, well, the fact that they felt the need to publish that must indicate that it's very rare indeed. So that's how he got around that one. So but he actually, it was 1999 that I think it was the American Journal of Nutrition published an article as a tribute to Mervyn Harding and the work that he'd done, because he did go on to complete his PhD in this area. And in it, they actually, just was really a tribute for the contribution he'd made to nutrition science. But he actually had this speech, and in that speech, he actually said, here's his exact words. He said, attitudes towards vegetarian diets have progressed from ridicule to skepticism to condescending tolerance to gradual and sometimes grudging acceptance, and then finally to acclaim. And I thought, isn't this interesting? So it was over 5 decades though, and he'd been through all of those stages: ridicule, opposition to acceptance as self-evident. And so that brought us to 2000. And, you think about from probably around about that time, so within the medical sort of established scientific community, there was acceptance, and it was, as he said, sometimes grudging acceptance that, okay. And it seems like the authority sort of caught onto it. And then I would say over the past 25 years, it's become quite mainstream accepted in terms of the potential. I mean, and there's dissenting voices still, and there's still, and we need that good, robust dialogue to continue. But I would say by and large, the fact that Hungry Jack's in Australia, which is like Burger King in the US, has 2 vegetarian options. That's telling that at a societal level, obviously there's interest, there's sort of acceptance that, hey, that might be a good option for me from a health benefit. So, so maybe even if, and vegetarianism being, an emphasis on sort of putting a plant slant to your diet being one of the pillars of lifestyle medicine, it seems like that's been on a journey since about the mid, last century. So we're probably 75 years in already. So what that might mean is that, maybe we've only got a couple of decades to go before this starts to get, seriously adopted into healthcare. Which might be a bit more encouraging for lifestyle medicine.
I think there's two other things that are worth noting, as we wrap up, Darren. The first is that the ideas, of course, are important, and that's what we're talking about, the introduction of new ideas and the pathway that they often tread before acceptance. But a really important part, of course, of bringing those ideas to full acceptance and to fruition is rigorous research. Research that really explores deeply what's going on. Research that's classically able to be disproven, so that the fundamental hypothetical test, and those who've trained in science will know that when we test an hypothesis, we don't actually do that at all. Well, we kind of do, but we don't test our active hypothesis. We test the null hypothesis. We try and demonstrate that it's not the case, and if we gather evidence against that, then we're starting to support this idea. So we mustn't ever divorce new ideas from then, the deep dive into what is there here really. Does this new idea really hold water? Does it really stand up? Because we all know that there can be new ideas all the time. Most ideas seem outlandish at the time. The idea that the sun was the centre of the universe seemed outlandish at the time, but the continued research was able to demonstrate that that was in fact the case. So we mustn't ever divorce ideas from the subsequent research and deep dive to endeavour to understand, is there actually something here?
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And I think that, and I actually think the world would be a better place. And certainly if we wanted to see diffusion of good ideas happening a lot more rapidly, what it would involve is us at an individual level being a lot more open to ideas. And maybe to borrow the word that I hear you use so often, to be curious. And to realise that, there's more to learn, where we are lifelong learners, and there are some great ideas out there. And instead of being sort of locked into our fixed ways of thinking, if we're open and responsive to that, I think it would help with getting good ideas out there a lot more rapidly. And I think the world would probably be a better place. We'd probably be a lot kinder to each other. And this is, I think, where it gets sad, is where you see, a lot of tension that in that opposition stage, people, feel like their ideas are being challenged and it's their way or the highway. I think that if we could all be a whole lot more open, a lot more receptive to the ideas and learning from others, I reckon things would go better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the useful takeaways for all of us is to tune into yourself and listen to your own ideas as well. Sometimes new ideas emerge through simply an unfolding process. We learn this, then we learn that, and we learn this next part, and then the part after that seems to be evident to us. But other times, like Newton's reputed discovery around gravity just seem to come as a bolt from the blue. They don't necessarily connect to any sort of logical progression of ideas. we all have creative ideas, I think, about different things in our lives, and I think one of the really useful things that we can all do is tune into those ideas and indulge them a little bit. See where they might go, because until we do that, we just don't know. We just don't know how much there is behind that idea.
Yes,
which
indeed.
is kind of a I think it sort of brings us back full circle to the beginning of our conversation. I've got a couple of ideas at the moment. One. I'm not going to tell you what they are. I'm not going to announce them here publicly, because one of the ideas I think is the sort of idea that could make me a multi-millionaire. So
I'm sure.
So I don't want to share that one just yet. But it's an idea that I think would be exciting and involving, and would completely change the way that we understand and experience history. So that's my big idea that I'm toying with at the moment. But when your wife said to you, you're an ideas man, I think what she wasn't saying is probably the more important part there. And perhaps what she wasn't saying is, you're not an action man. And and the action, of course, following the idea is really important. Ideas are wonderful, but until we do something with them, So,
and that's a good thought too. Good thought.
Be an ideas man or woman, and be an action man or woman as well. Don't let it stop just at the idea. Take the idea, do something with it, fail miserably, fail heaps of times, and keep going.
Love it. That is great advice. And I look forward to seeing your great idea completely revolutionise the world, Simon. Till next time.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.